what I think it does, instead of defining what DC's career is all about, I think it defines what a heavyweight's all about. I mean, the question then is, okay, so we've got DC as a relatively small heavyweight, he's a 5'11" heavyweight that's carrying a bit of extra meat that he doesn't really benefit a great deal from. How does he deal with a real massive heavyweight like Brock Lesnar? And then that question falls into our lap, and that's a question that I would want answered then, because ultimately what we're trying to find at heavyweight is the most efficient human being. The heavyweight champion is the baddest man on the planet, and there's a reason for that. It's because we assume the heavyweight champ can beat every other weight class as well. But if the light heavyweight champion steps up and beats heavyweight, then we've got to question whether actually the efficiency of a light heavyweight with a few more pounds on his shoulders, or maybe even just not cutting weight, is actually a better version of a combat athlete than a heavyweight could be.
That's fascinating. And you mentioned Brock Lesnar's name. It seems like he's a little bit in the mix. Obviously, he's still figuring out what's going on with the WWE. We're not sure what's happening. He might be on this pay-per-view called SummerSlam. He might not be. But where do you stand on the fact that he might be the next guy for whoever wins this fight? And would you be interested in seeing a Brock Lesnar-Stipe fight or a Brock Lesnar-DC fight?
Hey, ever since I saw Brock Lesnar running away from Cain Velasquez, I'll watch Brock Lesnar fight, because that tickled me.
I take it you enjoyed that.
To see a guy that's built like a fridge freezer run away from someone just because they were punching him, it just blows my mind.
Yeah.
When we get someone of Brock Lesnar's size that's got DC's mentality, that's when you've got a heavyweight that you can't beat. Unfortunately, although, with all the things that Brock Lesnar brings to the table, the one thing he doesn't have, in my opinion, is a real fighting spirit. He's got fighting spirit as long as he's the big bully man in there. But if you put someone in there that can punch him back, he starts to fall apart at the seams. And I think that's where a matchup with him and DC would be fascinating. I would take him against Miocic as well, but I think Miocic handles him pretty comfortably. But the size discrepancy between him and DC would, for me, make it, it's old school UFC fascinating. It's pride fighting championships fascinating. I don't mind, because I'm ultimately in this to find out not only what the best martial art is and what the best skill set is for martial arts and combat sports, but also what the ideal physical human being is. For a long time, we talked about John Jones. He's the perfect size and shape for a combat sports athlete, because he's 6'4". He's got an 84-inch reach, which is bigger than Stephen Struve. He's a bit of a freak when it comes to his physiology, but it also his ability to be creative and to put things together. There's still a question out there for that, and then there might still be a John Jones fight on the table if DC picks up a win as well. I would still like to see the Gustafsson fight. Obviously, I know that he's got a different opponent coming up, but there are so many interesting matchups for him. And to be honest, the margin between heavyweight and light heavyweight is so narrow anyway that any of those guys can step up. Volkan Oezdemir, if he picks up a big win, could step into the heavyweight division and start wrecking people. It's an exciting time for the heavy divisions, and I can't think of a time when it's been better.
It's fascinating because you mentioned before how a light heavyweight is stepping up and fighting a heavyweight, and how this kind of figures out who is the most dominant, what's going on in this sort of food chain of fighters. But do you think if we were having the same conversation about John Jones fighting Stipe, that we might even be leaning more towards the light heavyweight in John Jones than we are to Stipe? Would that almost add to that argument that you're putting together, that a light heavyweight can step up and possibly challenge the baddest man on the planet?
Absolutely. I think the thing that's interesting about John Jones for me, obviously, is that he's got a heavyweight frame, but he moves like a middleweight, really, if we're honest. So with him being able to span that distance that a heavyweight can, and hit them at the same kind of reach and distance that a big heavyweight can, as well as the fact that he can move very quickly. And you've got to think, heavyweight power is something to consider. But power comes from the combination of speed and strength, you know what I mean? So if John Jones can make up for his deficit in strength, or perceived deficit in strength at heavyweight, with the speed that he's almost definitely going to bring up, I think he hits heavyweights a lot harder than they would be expecting him to. And then, if you take weight cutting off the table, what's John Jones's natural weight? He's probably 220 anyway, 225. He doesn't carry a lot of weight, but I would say just the idea of taking weight cutting off the table is actually going to make him a better fighter. I think we're seeing that across the lighter divisions at the moment. Guys stepping up to welterweight and doing well. guys stepping up from welterweight to middleweight. I mean, with the current middleweight champions are former welterweight. You know, the times are changing, and I think that fighters are realizing that being more efficient in their own body, no matter what size that is always going to be a benefit to them over boiling themselves down and cutting. I would say that there's probably quite a few light heavyweights that could step up and probably look better at heavyweight than they do. You know, even Gustafsson. I mean, Gustafsson, if out of training camp, he's a monster. He is an absolute monster. But you boil him down to light heavyweight, and he starts to look a bit more like a schoolboy. And I think it's because he's so tired, so long and tall. But if you see him when he's filled out, when he's at proper size, however he makes 205. I used to start training camp at 205. So when I see Gustafsson walking down the street like a giant Viking, I think to myself, he could rule the heavyweight division if he chose to.
And it's crazy, even like what you mentioned before, controversy aside, to think that John Jones could potentially be even better, and if a weight cut is holding him back even a little bit, is just a scary thought.